He kissed me on the cheek, just like he always did. Light, almost rehearsed, like a man clocking out of duty. "I'll call you tonight," he said, already halfway out the door with his leather briefcase. Flight's at 6:20. I watched the taillights of his car disappear down the street, still in my robe, still holding the cup of tea I hadn't tasted. The house was too quiet after that. I sat down, slowly, at the kitchen table and stared at the sugar bowl, remembering how he used to joke that I gave him diabetes before I gave him wrinkles. Harvey always traveled light. One small roller bag and no fuss. Said it was just another conference. 4 days. Minneapolis. Insurance men in gray suits. Dinners with too much steak and not enough seasoning. He hated those trips. Or so he said. But that morning, something itched at me. Not suspicion, not quite. Just a flicker. Like when you walk into a room and forget why you came. And you stand there, holding your keys or your coffee, knowing something's missing. By noon the next day, I had forgotten about the flicker. The postman brought bills. The cat knocked over a potted plant. I noticed we were out of milk. Harvey had taken the better car, so I decided to use his, the old Buick he usually left in the garage. That's when it started. I turned the key. The GPS lit up. Nothing strange about that. But I touched the screen, thinking I'd check the route to the grocery store. And there it was. Recent destinations. 3 entries down. Janelle's house. The name meant nothing. The address, though, I recognized. Not the street exactly, but the neighborhood. Lakewood. Upscale. Townhouses with neat porches and perfect lawns. Not far. 20 minutes, maybe. I sat there with my hand on the gear shift for a good while. The milk could wait. I pulled out of the driveway like a woman who had someplace to be. The neighborhood looked like a magazine spread. Hydrated lawns, coordinated flower beds. Every house painted a shade approved by the Homeowners Association. Beige with ambition. Number 26 was a taupe 2-story with a hanging fern basket and a wreath on the door. Autumn-themed, tasteful, forgettable. I parked down the street and walked the last stretch. My heart wasn't pounding. That's the thing. I didn't feel dramatic or afraid, just clear. Like I'd stepped into a room where everything finally made sense. I rang the doorbell. Footsteps. Quick. Bare. The woman who opened the door was in a white bathrobe. She had short blonde hair, the kind you get from a salon that gives you sparkling water while they snip. Her mascara wasn't even smudged yet. She looked younger than me, but not young. Behind her, I could see a kitchen counter with 2 plates. Toast, eggs, orange juice in matching glasses, a man's watch on the edge of the sink. She blinked at me. I blinked at her. Yes? I looked at her, then at the breakfast, then back. "I think I've come to the wrong house," I said. My voice sounded too even, too calm. I was proud of that. "Oh," she said, giving me a polite, puzzled smile. But then I saw it. On the hook beside the door, his coat. Harvey's brown wool coat. I bought it for him last Christmas. He said it was too nice to wear to work. I knew every thread of that coat, and there it was, like a slap. "I'm sorry," I said again, quieter this time. "I should go." She watched me turn and walk away. She didn't call after me, didn't ask my name. She must have known, or maybe she didn't. I don't know which would be worse. Back in the car, I sat with my hands on the wheel. The milk was still on the list. But I drove straight home, past the store, past the town square, back to the small, quiet house we'd shared for 49 years. He had left yesterday morning, kissed me like always, And now I had seen the truth in a bathrobe and toast. I didn't cry. Not then. I just made a pot of tea, sat down at the table, and started thinking. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was crying. That would have been easier in a way. But no. I lay in bed with my eyes open, listening to the house creak and settle like it always did. Except now, every creak sounded like a question. Every shadow on the wall a memory with new meaning. The coat was the worst part. Not the woman. Not the breakfast. Not even the watch by the sink. It was the coat. Familiar, soft, worn at the elbows. That coat had been on his shoulders in every winter photo we'd taken the last 3 years. I'd stitched the inside pocket myself when the lining started to tear. I'd run my hands over those lapels 100 times without thinking, and now it was hanging in her hallway like it belonged there. At dawn, I got up and opened the kitchen curtains. The street was still gray, empty. A man across the road walked his dog in a hoodie and slippers. I watched him for a long time, sipping tea that had already gone cold. Harvey would be back on Sunday. That gave me time. Time for what? I didn't yet know. By midday, I'd changed the sheets, vacuumed the guest room, watered the geraniums. I did it all quietly, methodically, like I was preparing for something sacred or dangerous. At one point, I opened the hallway closet and looked at his jackets. The brown coat wasn't there, of course. It hadn't made the trip to Minneapolis. That coat had stayed warm on someone else's wall. I closed the closet door gently. That evening, I baked a pie. Not for him, for me. Peach and cinnamon with a little nutmeg. The smell wrapped around the house like comfort, like a time capsule. I cut a slice, put the rest in the fridge, and ate standing at the counter. That's how I knew I was angry, not hungry enough to sit. The next day, I drove back to Lakewood. Not to knock. Not yet. Just to look. Her car, a silver Lexus, was parked in the driveway. The blinds were open. I saw her in the kitchen. Same woman, hair done, slippers on. She was arranging something on a tray. Jam, toast, 2 cups. He was there. I didn't see him, but I knew it, like I knew the sound of my own breath. That kind of knowing doesn't ask for proof. I didn't stay. I drove to the lake instead, parked near the dock and sat on a bench where Harvey and I used to walk in the spring. We used to joke about retiring by the water. Buy a little boat, name it something foolish, the old love, or still afloat. Now I sat alone, watching ducks fight over breadcrumbs some child had thrown. I should have been falling apart. Should have screamed. Called my sister. Broken dishes. But I didn't want witnesses to this part. This part was mine. That night, I opened the old chest in the attic. Inside were letters, dozens of them, tied with a blue ribbon. My handwriting on most. His on a few. We wrote each other once a week the first year we were married, even though we lived together. It was something we promised to do, to keep the spark. Those letters felt sacred once. Now I read them like I was reading someone else's love story. Lil, one said, in his blocky, careful script. I still feel like a schoolboy every time I see you in the kitchen making coffee. That little sway in your hips could kill me. I stared at the page. My hands didn't tremble. My eyes didn't blur. The letter went back in the box. I found one of mine, written after our first big fight. Harv, I know we're both tired, but I need to believe that you still see me, that I'm not just the woman who folds your socks. I remembered that fight, about money, about his long hours. about me wanting to go back to school and him thinking it was impractical. I never did go back. I tied the ribbon again and closed the box. By Sunday, I'd made a decision. Not a final one, but the kind that makes you sit a little taller. He came home in the afternoon, just as the sun dipped behind the oak in the front yard. I was on the porch with a book I wasn't reading. He got out of the cab, smiled, and waved like nothing in the world had changed. I smiled back, like nothing in the world had changed. He kissed me on the cheek. His breath smelled faintly of spearmint gum and cologne. "Long flight," he said. "You must be tired," I replied. "Starving, too." "What's for dinner?" I stood up, brushed the cushion where I'd been sitting. "There's a pie in the fridge," I said. "Help yourself." Then I walked inside, left him standing there on the porch, holding his bag and his lie. He didn't ask any questions that evening. Maybe that's what struck me the most. He came in, took off his shoes, loosened his tie like he always did, opened the fridge, found the pie, ate it straight from the plate with a fork, leaning against the counter like a teenager with no manners. He didn't ask if I missed him, didn't ask how I'd been, didn't even ask why I hadn't made dinner. He just said, "That pie's incredible," and licked cinnamon off his thumb. I watched from the hallway, invisible in plain sight. I knew that angle of his face, the dip in his hairline, the lines deepening at his jaw. He was still handsome, still the man I married. But something in the way he moved made my stomach twist. He had the lightness of someone with a secret no longer heavy. After he showered, he turned on the TV in the den. Baseball. The same low murmur of crowd noise we'd heard for decades. He sat with his feet up, remote in hand, as if the past 4 days hadn't happened anywhere but at a conference. I didn't join him. Instead, I went into the bedroom and sat at my vanity, brushing my hair. 40 strokes. Slow, quiet. I watched myself in the mirror. 72, and I could still hold a secret in my face better than any actress on screen. He came to bed late, smelled like soap and his travel cologne. He kissed the top of my head and slid under the covers, sighing as if the world owed him rest. I lay still. I thought, he doesn't know I know. That thought was like a lit match in my chest. In the morning, he was up early. Eggs, toast, coffee. Made for himself. I stayed in bed, eyes closed, listening. After breakfast, he came into the bedroom with his travel bag half zipped. "I forgot to unpack my toiletries," he said casually, like it mattered. I nodded, watching the sunlight crawl across the carpet. When he left the room, I got up and opened the bag. Toothbrush, razor, cologne, and a folded shirt that didn't smell like his cologne at all. It smelled like lavender fabric softener, the kind we never used. I didn't touch it, just stared at it for a long time, then closed the bag and went to make my own breakfast. He left for work just after 9. I stood at the window, watching him pull out of the driveway, and for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like his wife. I felt like a housekeeper who had overstayed her usefulness. By noon, I was at the kitchen table, the legal pad in front of me. I made a list, not of what I needed to do, of what I had done. 49 years married. 2 sons, one buried before his first birthday, the other living in Arizona, calls once a month. 26 birthdays celebrated in this house. 6 hospital stays. 1 hip replacement. 1 heart scare. 4 houses bought and sold. 2 mortgages paid off. Thousands of dinners. Hundreds of arguments. A lifetime of compromise. And now, this. I didn't write his name. Didn't need to. I knew what he'd done. The woman in the bathrobe, the watch on the counter, the eggs cooked for two. I didn't need an affair explained. I needed to decide what came next. So I picked up the phone and called Barbara. We'd gone to high school together. She'd been a secretary for a lawyer until she retired. Knew the right people, the right questions. "Lil," she said, cheerful as ever. "You still breathing?" "Just barely," I said, managing a dry chuckle. "Oh dear," she said quickly, tone shifting. "You all right?" "I need the name of a good lawyer," I said. There was silence, then a quiet, knowing sigh. "I'll text you a number. Woman named Helene Marks. She's sharp. Not the kind that'll ask you twice if you're sure." "I'm sure," I said, even though I wasn't. Not yet. That afternoon, I found myself in the attic again. Not for letters this time, for records, the deed to the house, bank statements, tax returns. I'd never paid much attention before. Harvey had always taken care of the papers. I just signed where he pointed. But now I looked. I saw the accounts, joint ones, of course, savings, checking, a few certificates of deposit. I saw the payments. I saw the transfer he made 2 months ago, $10,000 to an account I didn't recognize. I wrote it down. I copied everything that seemed relevant. When he came home that evening, I was making lentil soup. Something bland, neutral. It gave me an excuse to stay quiet. He kissed my cheek again. "Thanks, babe," he said, grabbing a bowl. "Soup's a little salty," I said without looking up. He smiled. "Just like you." That night, I lay beside him in bed, eyes open, still, and I thought about the woman in the bathrobe, how she probably kissed him goodbye at dawn, how maybe she stood at her window, watching him leave, thinking she knew something about love. But she didn't. Neither of them did. Not yet. Tuesday morning began like any other. Birds on the fence, mail in the box, coffee percolating its tired little song. I folded his undershirts while the washing machine thumped behind me, and I wondered, not for the first time, how many women had done laundry for men who'd kissed someone else the day before. I finished folding and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the checkbook. My name was there. His too. Lillian and Harvey Bradshaw. Neat cursive. Faded ink. I'd been signing next to his name for almost 5 decades. He didn't know I was watching. Not him, not the account, not his lies. And I wasn't angry yet. Not in the way people imagine rage. I didn't want to scream or cry or throw a plate against the wall. No, my anger was quieter than that. Colder. The kind that wraps itself around your ribs and holds firm. The kind that makes you calm. At noon, I opened the filing cabinet in the hallway. Bottom drawer. That's where I'd kept all the old things. Not important now, he used to say. Outdated stuff. But I kept it anyway. Inside were letters. Not the sweet ones from our early days. I'd locked those away already. These were different. One was from 1983, addressed to Harvey. From a woman named Carol. The handwriting was loopy, girlish. "Thank you for the weekend," it read. "I can still smell you on my skin." I sat back in the chair, holding the paper by its edges like it might burn me. Carol. I had never known a Carol. I had no memory of a Carol. But Harvey had. 42 years ago. I kept reading. 3 letters total, all from Carol. Dated within the same year. Nothing after that. Maybe it ended. Maybe he ended it. Maybe it never stopped. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel surprised. Instead, I put them in a new envelope and wrote on the front, "Remember." I added it to the file I'd started. Documents, statements, printouts. A quiet collection of truths. That afternoon, I called Helene Marks. Her office was in a small beige building near the county courthouse. She answered on the second ring herself, which surprised me. "Ms. Bradshaw," she said, crisp and warm. "Barbara mentioned you might call." "I'd like to schedule a consultation," I said. "Divorce?" she asked, not unkindly. "Information," I replied. "For now." "Wednesday at 10 work for you?" "Yes." "Bring everything," she added. "Everything you think matters, and especially the things you think don't." I hung up and sat quietly for a long time. At dinner, Harvey talked about the weather, the gas bill, and how the neighbor's dog had dug up another section of the lawn. I stirred my stew and nodded. He didn't ask why I wasn't talking much. He'd long stopped noticing the spaces I leave empty. After dinner, he went to the den. I stayed in the kitchen, wiping the counter that wasn't dirty. When the water ran warm in the sink, I thought of Carol again. Did she know he had a wife? Did it matter? By the time I went to bed, he was already asleep. Mouth open slightly, one hand across his chest. I stared at the ceiling. At 1 a.m., I got up, made tea, and sat in the living room with the lights off. The house hummed around me. I thought of all the birthdays I'd baked cakes for. The nights I'd waited up with a hot plate, just in case he came home hungry. The times I'd held his hand in silence when words would have just embarrassed us both. And now, this. Not just infidelity. That was flesh. This was betrayal of history, of memory, of time. Wednesday morning, I dressed in gray slacks and a cream blouse. No lipstick, just powder. Understated, but not weak. Helene's office was cool and quiet. She was younger than me. Early 50s, maybe. Hair pulled back, reading glasses low on her nose. She looked up when I entered and smiled. Not the way a woman smiles at a victim. The way a woman smiles at someone arriving, finally, at her own side. We talked for an hour. I told her about the woman, the GPS, the watch, the coat. I handed her the folder I'd prepared. She flipped through it silently, eyebrows rising slightly at the bank transfers. "You've been smart," she said. "Prepared, organized." "I've had time," I said. She nodded. "Do you want to leave?" "I don't know yet." "Then don't," she replied. "But start moving your pieces anyway." She explained my options: joint assets, retirement funds, the house. She talked about what would happen if he contested, what would happen if he begged. "I don't want to ruin him," I said. "You won't," she replied. "But you'll stop letting him ruin you." I left her office feeling lighter. Not happy, but anchored. That night, I made chicken pot pie. He said it was his favorite. He ate 2 helpings and kissed my hand like we were newlyweds. "You're glowing tonight," he said. I smiled. "You must be imagining things." Thursday morning, I changed the sheets again. Not because they were dirty, but because I needed the bed to feel like mine for a few hours. Harvey had gone to work, wearing the blue tie I gave him for our 35th anniversary, the one he wore in our last family photo. I wondered if he realized it was the same one. I wondered if she'd ever noticed it, or if to her it was just one of many ties draped over her bedpost on Monday mornings. I opened the closet and looked at his row of shoes. Polished, organized, reliable. That's how he liked to be seen. A man who held his world together by habit. But he hadn't noticed the car keys were no longer hanging by the door. I'd moved them, not far, just to the side drawer in the hallway. I wanted to know if he'd say anything, notice, react. He didn't. Not that morning. Instead, he kissed me on the cheek again and said, "Don't wait up. Late meeting tonight." I nodded. He didn't say where, and I didn't ask. Not this time. because I had plans of my own. By noon, I was at the credit union on 5th Street. I'd opened the account there 43 years ago when we bought our first house. Back then, the manager had offered us a toaster with our deposit. I'd picked the red one. That toaster lasted longer than most of our good years. "Mrs. Bradshaw," the woman at the desk said kindly, "what can I do for you today?" "I'd like to open a new account," I said. "In my name only." She blinked, then smiled. "Of course. Checking? Savings?" "Both." She slid the forms toward me. "Would you like to transfer funds from your joint account?" I paused, just a beat. "No," I said. "I'll deposit separately." As she typed, I watched the cursor blink on the screen. "You've banked with us a long time," she said. "Everything all right?" "Everything's finally just beginning," I replied. By the time I got home, the sun had shifted in the sky. That late afternoon gold that used to feel romantic. Now it just looked tired. I made tea and sat in the den, flipping through our old photo albums. There we were, in Niagara Falls, 20 years younger. Him with his arm around my shoulders. Me squinting at the camera. I tried to remember what that version of me felt. If she'd ever imagined an ending like this. A knock at the door broke the silence. It was Ruth, my neighbor from across the street. She carried a pie, apple. "I baked too much again," she said, grinning. I invited her in. We sat in the kitchen like we had so many times before. Two old women trading stories the way we always did. Only this time, I was careful. She noticed. "You all right, Lil?" she asked gently. I smiled. "Just tired." "Tired or done?" I looked at her then. Really looked. Her eyes were sharp, kind. She'd been married 3 times, widowed twice, left once. She knew things. "Done pretending," I said finally. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Good," she said. "Tired women make the best decisions." We talked for an hour. About nothing, about everything. When she left, the house felt less hollow. That evening, Harvey called around 6. "I'm heading out of the office now," he said. I replied. "Don't wait up. Might grab dinner with clients." I stayed silent. "You all right?" he asked. "Of course." He hesitated. "You sure?" "Positive," I said, and hung up. At 8, I checked the GPS history on the Buick. He'd turned it off. Clever man, but too late. I already knew where he went. I already knew who she was. And I already knew what I was going to do next. I stood at the mirror and took a long look at myself. 72. Gray hair, pulled back in a bun. Soft lines around my mouth. Eyes still clear. Still mine. I reached for the necklace I hadn't worn in years. Silver, with a tiny locket. Inside, a picture of me and Harvey from our honeymoon. I opened it, then closed it again, and put it back in the drawer. Some memories are better left shut. He came home at midnight. I was awake. Not waiting for him. Just awake. The hallway light was on, soft and yellow. I sat in the armchair by the window, wrapped in my old knitted shawl. The one I'd worn the day his mother died. The one I hadn't touched in years. Harvey walked in with the same casual energy he always carried after a long evening. Coat over his arm, tie loosened, shoes already unbuckled. He looked surprised to see me sitting there. "Lily?" he said, voice low, almost cautious. "What are you doing up?" I tilted my head slightly. "Couldn't sleep." He gave me a quick smile, the kind meant to disarm. "You should have gone to bed. It's late." I noticed. He walked past me toward the kitchen. I heard the clink of glass, the fridge door. A gulp of water. When he came back, he leaned against the doorway. his silhouette heavy in the light. "Long day," he said, as if he owed me that much. I didn't ask. I didn't press. He stood there a few seconds longer, then pushed off the frame and disappeared down the hall to our bedroom. I didn't follow. At dawn, he left early again. Said there was a presentation. Kissed my forehead like he hadn't just slipped through the house like a shadow, like everything was fine, normal. I waited until the car pulled away. Then I went to the bedroom. His scent lingered in the air, cologne and some other note, sweeter, unfamiliar. The sheets on his side were rumpled, warm hours ago. I smoothed them flat, not out of care, but instinct. On the dresser, his cufflinks sat askew, and on the bathroom counter, his comb. A strand of hair clung to it, thinner than before. I looked at my reflection, then at the comb, and I had a sudden, vivid memory. Harvey, 25, combing his hair nervously before our first dinner with his boss. Me, standing behind him, fixing his collar, whispering, "You've got this." He'd smiled at me in the mirror, nervous and grateful. Now there was only silence between us, a silence that had been growing for years, slow and patient, like ivy crawling over old brick. I spent the morning cleaning, not out of need, out of necessity. There's a difference. I emptied drawers, dusted bookshelves, rearranged the linen closet. In the back of the top shelf, I found a photo album I hadn't opened in over a decade. One page held our 30th anniversary party. Big smiles. Friends from church. Harvey had his arm around me, his other hand holding a glass of champagne. He'd whispered into my ear that night, "We made it this far, kid. Let's keep going." I had believed him. I had wanted to, but now here we were, year 49, and I didn't even know where he really spent his Thursdays. I closed the album and set it on the guest bed. Let it gather new dust. That evening, he was home on time. He brought tulips, my favorite, yellow. "I passed the flower stand on Main," he said, like that explained everything. "Thought of you?" I took them, thanked him. He kissed my cheek again, and for the first time, I turned slightly, just enough that it landed near my ear instead. He noticed. His eyes flicked to mine, questioning, but he said nothing. At dinner, we sat across from each other. Roast chicken, roasted carrots, his favorite. He talked about a client, something about a merger. I nodded at the right moments, sipped my wine, smiled with my mouth but not my eyes. He didn't ask me about my day. He hadn't in years. After dinner, I cleared the table. He offered to help, half-heartedly. "No need," I said. "I've got it." He went to the den. When the kitchen was clean, I stood by the sink, hands resting on the edge, staring out at the dark yard. I thought about the woman again, her robe, her smile, her house with its wreath on the door. I wondered if she knew she was sharing a man with someone who had folded his shirts for 49 years, who had held his hand in operating rooms, who had watched him cry the day his brother died, who had kept every birthday card he ever gave her, even the ones with nothing but his initials inside. I wondered if she knew he still kissed me goodnight, if she knew I was still setting his plate, still washing his clothes, still pretending. Or maybe she didn't care. Maybe she believed she had the real version of him now. I wiped my hands on the towel, turned off the lights, went to bed early, let him find his own way through the dark. I didn't speak to him the next morning, not in anger, not in silence, just absence. He moved around the house like a man who believed he was still welcome. Coffee brewed, keys jingled, shoes tied neatly by the door. I watched from the hallway as he adjusted his collar in the mirror, unaware I stood 5 feet away, not blinking. He turned, startled. "Oh, didn't see you there," he said with a smile. I didn't return it. He hesitated, holding his briefcase like a shield. "Everything all right?" I tilted my head. "Is it?" His lips parted, but nothing came. Then the smallest shake of his head, brushing it off like lint. "Long week, huh?" He kissed the air near my temple and left. I didn't move for a long time after the door closed. I sat in the kitchen with my second cup of tea, letting it grow cold. I looked around the house like I was seeing it for the first time. The curtains I'd sewn myself, the dining chairs we reupholstered together, the wall where we'd measured our son's height every birthday until he moved away for good. I had built this life, brick by brick, thread by thread, and now I was standing in it like a stranger in a museum of someone else's devotion. At 10:15 sharp, I drove to Helene's office. I wore my best wool coat, the navy one with the subtle pinstripes, and my sensible heels. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I refused to show up small. She greeted me with the same calm grace. "Morning, Mrs. Bradshaw." "Call me Lillian." We sat down. She had a folder already prepared. "I've gone over the documents you brought. Here's what we know." And she told me about the assets, the way the accounts were structured, the suspicious transfer I'd marked, the one for $10,000. "He's been moving money," she said plainly, slowly, carefully, like someone preparing for something. I didn't flinch. I just nodded. "I want to protect what's mine," I said. "And you can," she replied. We went through options. Trusts, property rights, quiet legal shifts that would be invisible at first. "You don't have to file for divorce," she said. "Not yet, not ever, if that's your choice. But you can secure your name." I signed what needed signing, initialed where she pointed. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a layer peel off me. Not of pain, of passivity. By noon, I had more power than I'd had in years, and Harvey had no idea. On the way home, I stopped at the small bakery on 4th, bought 2 scones, a loaf of rye, and a coffee I didn't need. The young girl at the register complimented my coat. "Elegant," she said, "like someone who gets what she wants." I smiled for real, just for a second. At home, I sat with the bread and coffee at the kitchen table, slowly tearing off pieces, dipping them into the cup. The house was silent, still. And I realized something. I wasn't lonely. I was just used to being quiet while someone else filled the air. I folded the receipts into my wallet and stacked the legal documents inside a folder labeled insurance, a label I knew Harvey would never open. He never bothered with that drawer. Said it was your department. He'd delegated me so long ago he forgot I could still choose. That evening, he came home with takeout. Thai food, from my favorite place, chicken satay and pad see ew. "Thought you could use a break from cooking," he said, setting the bags on the counter. I helped him unpack it, plating the food neatly. He poured wine. I didn't speak much. He filled the silence with talk of the office, a new intern, a printer jam, someone's retirement party next week. I watched his hands, how they moved, how he twirled his fork slightly before taking a bite. I remembered how I used to find it endearing. Now it just looked like rhythm. A man who never had to question whether someone was waiting to feed him. After dinner, he turned to me with a gentle smile. "You've been quiet lately." I raised my eyebrows. "Have I?" He nodded. "Is something wrong?" I set down my napkins slowly. I'm just thinking, I said. About what? About what it costs to stay. His smile faltered. Stay where? In a marriage, I said, my voice steady. In a house. In a life that no longer feels mine. His face changed then, not with guilt, not with panic, but with confusion. Genuine, blank confusion, as if the idea that I could speak that way was completely foreign. Lily, he said, but the rest never came. I stood, cleared the plates, wiped the counter. He didn't follow me, didn't stop me. Just sat there, alone at the table, holding a wine glass he hadn't finished. I left him there and went to bed. And for the first time in years, I fell asleep without waiting for the sound of his footsteps. Friday morning, I packed a small overnight bag, 2 changes of clothes, my toiletry kit, a book I'd been meaning to finish for 6 years. I didn't pack it with urgency or anger, just quiet certainty. He was in the shower when I zipped the bag closed. The steam drifted down the hall, warm and clean. The same scent he always used, pine and menthol, like a man still pretending he chopped wood on the weekends. I left a note on the kitchen counter. No drama, no accusations, just a folded piece of paper with 2 sentences. I'm gone for a few days. Don't call. He would see it when he came down for coffee. I didn't care what he did after. The drive was peaceful. I took the longer route, through the back roads, past the old orchard, where we used to take picnics when our son was little. The trees were turning gold, leaves beginning to fall like a slow confession. By noon, I arrived at Dorothy's house. She opened the door with flour on her hands and an apron tied around her waist. Lillian? She blinked, then her face lit up. Well, I'll be damned. I hadn't called ahead. I didn't need to. Dorothy had been my friend since I was 22. We'd survived babies, funerals, surgeries, arguments, and an entire summer where we didn't speak because I'd borrowed her cast iron skillet and forgot to return it. She looked at me for half a second longer, then pulled me into a hug. I'll put the kettle on, she said. Her house was cluttered in the way only lived-in homes are. Blankets draped over every chair, framed photos on every surface. Her late husband, Russ, smiled down at us from the mantel, always wearing that ridiculous fishing hat. I sat at her kitchen table and said nothing for a long time. Dorothy didn't push. She just set the tea in front of me, slid a warm scone onto a plate, and sat down across from me with a soft grunt. You don't need to tell me anything, she said finally. But if you want to, I've got nowhere to be. And I told her, not every detail, not the GPS or the bathrobe or the eggs, but enough to make her face go still. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. Well, she said, about goddamn time. I blinked. What? She pointed at me with the handle of her spoon. You've been fading, Lillian, year by year. You used to have more color in your cheeks, more fire in your eyes. Then you got quiet, not peaceful quiet, resigned quiet. I didn't want to admit it, I said. None of us do, she replied. We build a life around someone, and by the time we realize it's hollow, we're too far in to climb out without breaking a hip. That made me laugh. The first real laugh in weeks. You've still got time, she added, but not forever. I stayed with Dorothy 2 nights. We baked, talked, walked the neighborhood in the late afternoon. I slept in the guest room with the lilac bedspread and the little ceramic lamp that made the walls glow like dusk. On Sunday morning, I sat on her porch swing, sipping coffee as the wind played with my robe. Dorothy came out, handed me a folded newspaper. Page 6, she said. It was the community section. There, in black and white, was a photo of Harvey. Local insurance firm celebrates 30 years. Harvey Bradshaw honored at gala. He stood in the picture with two other men, holding a plaque, smiling, comfortable, his arm around a woman in a navy sheath dress. Not me, not a colleague. Her, Janelle, the woman in the bathrobe. Dorothy peered over my shoulder. That her? I nodded. She's not even that pretty, she muttered. She doesn't have to be, I said quietly. I folded the paper and set it aside. By noon, I was packed again, ready to go. Dorothy hugged me tight. You know where to find me, she said. I always have, I replied. The drive home was quiet. No music, no rush. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was still on, even though it was broad daylight. Inside, the note was gone from the counter. His coat was on the hook. His shoes lined up neatly by the wall. The kitchen smelled like he'd tried to cook something. There was a note in return, folded neatly on the table. I'm sorry. Please come to bed tonight. That was all. No explanation, no confession. Just an invitation back into silence. I didn't touch the note. I went upstairs, took a long, hot shower, changed into my softest nightgown. Then I made myself a cup of tea, brought it into the guest room, and closed the door behind me. He could sleep in our bed if he wanted, but I wouldn't be joining him. Not tonight. And maybe not ever again. He didn't knock on the guest room door that night. He must have heard me moving. The floorboards creak, the kettle whistle, the sound of my cup setting down. But he stayed on his side of the house. Maybe he thought silence was safer than confrontation. Maybe he didn't know what to say. Maybe there was nothing left worth saying. I lay awake, listening to the clock tick in the hallway. Each tick sounded like a pulse, faint but steady. The rhythm of a life that had learned to survive through waiting. I'd waited through nights of overtime, through business trips, through years of not being touched with tenderness. But this was the first night I was waiting for nothing at all. At dawn, I made coffee. 2 mugs out of habit. One stayed untouched. He appeared in the doorway, hair damp from the shower, dressed too neatly for a Sunday. His eyes looked smaller than usual, as if something had been taken from behind them. Morning, he said. Morning. He looked at the untouched mug. You made coffee. For me. He shifted. Right. Of course. The silence hung between us like a stretched wire. I saw the paper, I said finally. My voice didn't tremble. It was almost gentle. Looked like a lovely event. He froze, the color draining from his face. You went through my things? He asked, defensive too quickly. I read the local news, I replied evenly. I like to keep up. He rubbed the back of his neck. It wasn't what you think. Oh? I turned toward him fully. What do I think? His jaw flexed. Janelle's a colleague. We were representing the company. She helped organize the event. That's all. You put your arm around all your colleagues like that? He looked away. I set my cup down. You don't have to lie anymore, Harvey. You can say her name without choking on it. I already know. For a second, I saw something flash across his face. Shame, anger, relief, maybe all 3. Then it was gone. He exhaled and leaned against the counter. I didn't mean for you to find out this way. I almost laughed. This way? As if there was a good way to discover that your husband's loyalty had an expiration date. How long? I asked quietly. He hesitated. A few months. I looked at him steady. Try again. His eyes flickered. He sat down at the table, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "A year," he said finally. "Maybe a little more?" The air in the room shifted. No shouting, no dramatics, just truth settling into its place, solid and cold. "I see," I said. He looked up, desperate now. "It didn't mean anything, Lillian. It was stupid. I was lonely." "So was I said. "But I didn't go looking for company." He flinched as if I'd hit him. He started to speak again, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I said softly. "I don't want excuses. I just want honesty, and we're far too late for that." He nodded slowly, like a man hearing a verdict he already knew was coming. "I'll end it," he said after a while. "You have my word. Your word doesn't hold much weight these days." "I'll prove it," he insisted, standing. "I'll talk to her. Harvey." My voice was calm, almost kind. "You don't have to do anything. You've already done enough." He stopped, stared at me. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've been to see a lawyer." The blood drained from his face. "I haven't filed anything," I continued. "Not yet. But I understand my options now. What belongs to me, what doesn't. I know about the transfers." His mouth opened, then closed again. "You've been going through my accounts." "Our accounts," I corrected. "The ones with both our names. The ones I helped fill." "Lillian," he said, voice cracking a little. "Please, I made a mistake. I'll fix it." "You can't fix something you never meant to keep whole," I said. "It's already broken." He sank back into the chair, head low, breathing shallow. I almost pitied him. Almost. But pity is just another word for debt, and I was done lending parts of myself I'd never get back. I stood. "You should take the guest room tonight." He looked up sharply. "What?" "I need space," I said simply. "Real space. Not the polite kind you've given me for years while you lived a second life across town." He opened his mouth, closed it again, and finally nodded. When he stood to leave the kitchen, his shoulders looked smaller somehow. Deflated. For a moment, I saw the man I married. Not the liar, not the stranger. Just the man. The one who once held my hand through a miscarriage, who painted the bathroom the wrong color and left it that way because I'd laughed too hard to correct him. But that man had vanished a long time ago. Now, only a tired silhouette remained. When he closed the guest room door, I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat by the window. Outside, the day was bright and unbothered. I felt the smallest spark of something inside me. Not joy, not victory, just relief. The quiet kind that comes from finally speaking aloud what's been killing you in silence. The next morning, the house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. No drawers opened. No shoes scraped across the hallway tiles. No scent of coffee or aftershave trailing behind him. He was still here. I knew that. But he didn't come out of the guest room. I didn't knock. I made breakfast for one. Eggs, toast, apricot jam. His favorite, but I spread it across only one slice. Mine. The newspaper was on the porch, exactly where he used to place it for me. I picked it up, brought it inside, and didn't mention it. Let him wonder if I noticed. Let him wonder if I still cared. I didn't. Not in the old way. Something had shifted inside me. Not cracked. No, cracking sounds sudden. This had been a long, slow erosion. Years in the making. And now the core had finally surfaced. I didn't miss him. Not really. What I missed was the idea of him. The shadow of the man I thought I'd married. The laugh that used to be deep and careless before it grew rehearsed. The touch that used to land with intention, not obligation. I missed feeling chosen, but I didn't miss him. By late morning, I changed the sheets again. Mine this time. Fresh linen, crisp corners. A small act of reclaiming space. He emerged after noon, hair uncombed, wrinkled shirt. The man didn't know how to look small, but today he tried. Morning, he muttered, though it wasn't. Afternoon, I corrected, not unkindly. He hovered near the kitchen like he wasn't sure if he still had permission to cross the threshold. I didn't sleep, he said, voice dry. I sipped my tea. That makes two of us. He looked at me like he didn't recognize the woman across the table. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I didn't either. I thought we could talk. I nodded toward the chair. Go ahead. He sat slowly, as if his bones suddenly belonged to someone older than him. I don't know where to begin, he admitted. How about why? He looked down at his hands. I don't know. I really don't. It started small. She was easy to talk to. I didn't plan any of it. You didn't stop it either. He nodded. You're right. There was something tragic about the way he said it, like a child who finally realized the jar was broken and the candy was gone, and no one was coming to replace it. We stopped being close, Lily, he said. Somewhere along the line, we became quiet, tired. I leaned back. That's called marriage, Harvey. It gets quiet. It gets hard. But that's when you stay, not stray. He exhaled. I didn't want to hurt you. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You just didn't want to get caught. He winced. Silence followed. Not the cold kind this time, but the kind that waits for something to land. Finally, he said, I'll do anything you ask. I folded my hands in my lap. Then listen. He looked up. I want the house, I said. He opened his mouth, but I continued. I want everything in my name. Full transfer. We'll handle it with Helene. He nodded slowly. I want access to all financial records, passwords, printouts. Of course. I want time. He looked confused. Time? To think, I clarified. To breathe. To live in this space without pretending anymore. He swallowed. Does that mean we're... It means you've been living your life, Harvey. Now it's time I start living mine. He nodded again, slower this time. More thoughtful, more broken. I never stopped loving you, he whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. After he left the kitchen, I went to the drawer where I kept the house papers, pulled out the folder I'd labeled just in case 5 years ago, opened it, started crossing out his name. I didn't cry. I didn't pause. I just kept writing, signing, preparing. Because loving someone doesn't mean staying when they've already left you in every way but the physical. That night, I didn't hear him move. No footsteps, no lights under the door. And for the first time, I felt no anxiety about it. I curled into bed with my book and read until sleep took me. Not as a wife, not as a victim, just as a woman, alone, and finally okay with that. The first time I didn't cook dinner, I expected a reaction. Not a fight, not yelling, just something. A raised eyebrow, a question, even silence with weight to it. But when 6 o'clock came and went without a scent from the kitchen, Harvey didn't say a word. He poured himself a bowl of cereal and sat alone at the table, crunching like a man who had always eaten alone. And maybe, in some ways, he had. I sat in the den with my knitting. The needles moved like they always had, rhythm steady, tension precise. I'd started a new scarf. Not for him, not for anyone, just for the motion of it. The sound of his spoon tapping the bowl drifted in from the kitchen. It didn't bother me. It just didn't matter. That's when I knew something fundamental had shifted, not just in our marriage, but in me. I wasn't acting anymore. I wasn't performing some quiet protest, waiting to be pulled back in. I had stepped out. Fully. The next day, I moved his things from our bedroom. Every drawer, every hanger. I folded his sweaters and shirts neatly, lined his shoes up by pairs, set everything into the guest room closet as carefully as I would for a guest I didn't plan to keep long. I didn't throw anything. Didn't slam a single door. He came home and found the drawers empty, his belts missing from the hook behind the door. He stood there for a full minute before he turned around and looked at me in the hallway. "You moved my things," he said. I nodded. "You could have told me." "I just did." He blinked like he didn't quite understand the new terms of our language. But he didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He walked down the hall, entered the guest room, and closed the door. That night, I slept like I hadn't in months. In a room that no longer carried the scent of betrayal. In a bed that no longer trembled under someone else's guilt. I woke early and watched the sunrise from the porch. There was a bird in the oak tree, picking at something in the bark. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and thought about how many mornings I'd spent waiting. For his car to pull into the driveway, for his voice to fill the kitchen, for something unspoken to shift back into place. Now I wasn't waiting. I was watching, observing, owning every inch of that silence. By the end of the week, the legal documents were ready. Helene called. "Everything's in order," she said. "The house, the accounts, we've got leverage." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clean. "I'd like to come in Monday," I said. "We'll be ready." Harvey didn't ask where I went during the day anymore, and I didn't offer. He still moved around the house like it was his, still left his keys on the hook, his socks by the dryer, his glasses on the kitchen table. But I didn't pick up after him, didn't remind him, didn't carry the weight. Saturday morning, I cleaned the pantry. 3 expired jars of jam, flour with weevils, a bottle of balsamic vinegar we'd bought on a trip to Maine and never opened. I cleared it all out, made space. When Harvey came in from mowing the lawn, sweat on his brow, he looked into the pantry and blinked. "Something's different," he said. "Yes." He waited for more, but I didn't give it. He stared at me for a moment. Then, softly, "Are you really done, Lil?" I met his eyes. "I'm not done," I said. "I'm just not pretending anymore." He nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. He looked older then, not from age, but from the weight of his choices finally settling into his bones. "I miss you," he whispered. I didn't say it back. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because I finally understood the difference between missing someone and missing who you thought they were. And that gap, that unbearable, irreversible gap, couldn't be closed with words. That night, he made dinner. Nothing fancy, just spaghetti and a jar of sauce. He set 2 plates on the table and lit a candle. I ate in silence, tasting everything, saying nothing. And when the dishes were done, I went to my room, closed the door, and read another chapter of my book. Sunday was quiet. Church bells rang in the distance, though neither of us dressed to go. We hadn't gone in years, even though we still nodded to the idea of belief when it suited us. It used to be routine. Hat, gloves, perfume. Now it was just another sound in the background of a house learning how to breathe without pretense. I made oatmeal, not for him, just a single portion. He came into the kitchen halfway through my second bite, his hair still damp from a shower. "You made some," he said, motioning toward the pot. "There's more if you want it," I replied. He hesitated, then ladled his portion in silence. We sat across from each other, two bowls between us, two people who had once shared a lifetime, now sharing awkward spoonfuls. After a while, he said, "I haven't called her since last week." I kept eating. She called me twice. I didn't pick up. I looked at him. He looked tired, not just in the face, but in the soul, like a man finally facing the work it takes to fix what he broke. "I thought that might matter to you," he added. I folded my napkin slowly. "It's not about her, Harvey. It never was. It's about you and me. And the space between us that you kept filling with things I didn't know about." He didn't speak after that. When breakfast was over, I stood, rinsed my bowl, and went outside to tend the garden. The marigolds were still holding strong, bright as gold coins. I clipped the ones that had browned and turned the soil with my hands, letting the dirt settle into my skin. There was something holy about it. Rooted. Alive. By noon, I was sitting on the porch steps, wiping my hands on an old towel when Harvey opened the screen door behind me. "Want some lemonade?" he asked. I nodded, surprised. He returned with 2 glasses, condensation beading down the sides. We sat side by side in silence. After a while, he said, "I never thought you'd pull away." I sipped slowly. "You never thought I'd notice?" "No, I knew you'd notice," he said. "I just thought you'd forgive it." I looked at him. "I have," I said. He turned to me, startled. "Forgiveness doesn't mean restoration," I added. "It just means I'm not going to carry your guilt on my back anymore." He nodded slowly, took a long drink. "You're different now," he said. "I'm clearer now." He didn't argue. We watched the street for a while. Neighbors pulling in groceries, a boy riding his bike too fast down the hill. Life went on. Then he said something he'd never said in nearly 50 years of marriage. "I'm scared." I looked over. He was staring at his hands. "I know I messed this up, and I don't expect to get everything back, but I don't know who I am without you." The words should have landed like a confession, but they sounded like a child's plea. And I realized then, he hadn't just betrayed me, he'd betrayed himself. The version of himself he had tried to hold on to with business cards and secret addresses, and pretending he still mattered to someone else. "I think it's time you figured that out," I said gently. He looked up, eyes full of something raw. Regret, maybe. Maybe just fear. I stood. "There's a casserole in the freezer if you get hungry." I went inside, closed the door behind me. That afternoon, I pulled out the suitcase I hadn't touched since Dorothy's house. I laid it open on the bed, but didn't fill it. Not yet. Just left it there. A quiet reminder. I could leave again. Anytime. But this time, it wouldn't be because I had nowhere else to go. It would be because I finally knew where I stood. Monday came with a thin gray sky and a chill in the air that meant the season was turning. I dressed in layers, sweater, scarf, sturdy shoes, the kind of outfit you wear when you need to feel solid. At Helene's office, everything was ready. She laid out the paperwork like it was just business, but her eyes watched me carefully. Not for hesitation. She must have seen enough of that in other women. She watched for resolve, and I gave it to her. We went line by line. House title, savings account separation, transfer of ownership for the second car. All the invisible strings that had quietly tied my name to his, cut with clean, deliberate ink. "You've done well," Helene said. "Most women wait too long to make the shift. You didn't." I didn't feel pride, just steadiness. On my way home, I stopped by the grocery store. Bought lamb chops, fresh rosemary, a bottle of red wine I hadn't touched in years. Not to celebrate, to mark the moment. When I walked through the front door, Harvey was in the living room, a book open in his lap, but his eyes weren't reading. They lifted as I entered. "How was your day?" he asked, like it was any other Monday. "Clear," I said, hanging my coat. "Productive," he nodded. "I've been thinking." "Good. I've been remembering a lot too," he added. "Your laugh used to fill this house." I didn't answer. I don't know when I stopped hearing it. "I do," I said. He closed the book gently. "I meant what I said yesterday. I am scared, but not of losing comfort. I'm scared of facing the version of myself that let this happen, that allowed this distance to grow like rot behind a wall." He was trying, but trying didn't undo the past. That evening, I cooked, not because he asked, not to win him back. I just missed the sound of rosemary hitting hot oil, the sharp smell of garlic rising into the air. I cooked for the memory of who I'd been before everything dulled. He set the table without being asked. We ate in silence. Halfway through the meal, he reached for the wine and poured me a glass. "To what?" he asked. I raised my glass and said, "To the truth." He clinked his glass softly against mine. "Even if it's ugly?" "Especially then." After dinner, we washed the dishes together. Slowly. No talking. Just the rhythm of shared work. When the plates were done, he reached for a towel, dried his hands, and said, "If you leave, I'll understand." I looked at him. "I haven't decided," I replied. He nodded. "I just want to be the man who's worth staying for," he said quietly. "You should have thought of that before you became the man who was easy to leave." He didn't argue, didn't flinch, just looked at me with something close to gratitude. That night, I didn't go to the guest room, not because I forgave him, but because I had nothing to hide from anymore. I lay in our bed with my back to him. We didn't touch, didn't speak. But for the first time in a long time, we were two people breathing in the same room, no masks, no performance. And sometimes that's harder than love. Sometimes that's what healing begins to look like. He started asking questions again, not the kind that fill silence, the kind that reach. "What do you want for dinner tomorrow? Do you remember that trip to Bar Harbor? Was I ever a good husband to you? That last one came on a Wednesday morning while I was folding laundry." I didn't answer right away. I placed his shirt, one of the older ones, soft from years of wash, into the basket and looked at him standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets like a boy in trouble. "You were good at being present," I said. "You brought home flowers, paid bills on time, kissed me hello." His face softened, almost relieved. "But that's not the same as being close," I added. He nodded slowly and left the room without pushing. That was new. The old Harvey would have tried to fix it right then and there. The one standing in front of me now had learned to sit with discomfort. We were learning how to be in the same house without slipping back into what we'd been. That meant relearning everything. How to pass each other in the hallway. How to share space without pretending. How to be polite without being dishonest. He cooked dinner once, pork chops with burnt edges, green beans too soft. I ate every bite, not because it was good, but because it was effort. And after 50 years, Effort counts more than seasoning. He started fixing things around the house again. Not big things, little ones. A drawer that used to stick, a faucet that dripped, the screen door that always squealed. I watched him from the window once, struggling with a screwdriver. He muttered under his breath like he used to when assembling Christmas gifts for our son. And I felt something then. Not affection, not forgiveness. Just warmth. Like remembering a version of a man who once knew how to care without breaking things along the way. I didn't tell him I noticed, but I left the porch light on for him that night, even though he was already home. The next day, I drove out to the lake. Alone. I brought a sandwich and a thermos of tea, parked the car facing the water, and just sat. The same bench we'd once sat on the summer after his mother died, when grief had made him quiet and unreachable. He'd been 39. I'd held his hand then, without needing him to speak. Now, all these years later, I held my own hand. I thought about what comes after silence. Not reconciliation, not separation. Just the in-between. A space where you're not sure what you're building, only that it can't look like the ruins of what came before. When I got home that evening, he was waiting on the porch. He didn't ask where I'd been, just stood as I stepped out of the car and said, "You look lighter." "I feel still," I said. "That's better than light." He nodded. "I made soup," he added. "It's probably too salty." "Then it'll match me," I said. We both smiled, small, tired, honest. Over soup we didn't talk much, but when I got up to do the dishes, he reached for the sponge before I could. "You always washed," he said. "It's my turn now." And he meant it. Later that night, we sat on the couch, 2 feet of space between us, but it didn't feel like distance. He asked me about my mother, my favorite book, the first song I ever loved, questions he should have asked 50 years ago. I answered, not out of obligation, but because it felt like someone was finally listening. At one point, he said, "I don't expect anything." "Good," I replied, "because I'm not giving anything away by accident anymore." He nodded. "Can I ask one more?" "One. If I had told you the truth back then, would you have left me?" I looked at him for a long time, then said, "You didn't lie because you were afraid I'd leave. You lied because you thought I wouldn't." That landed harder than anything else I'd said. But he didn't deflect. He just said, "You're right." And I believed him. That night, I went to bed alone again, but not angry. I pulled the covers over my shoulder and thought, maybe this is what truth feels like after the storm. Not joy, not clarity, just stillness. And for now, that was enough. He left on a Thursday. No bags, no drama. Just the sound of the front door closing with more respect than he'd used in years. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't have to. We'd been saying it, piece by piece, for months, in silences, in separate meals, in the space I gave him, and the space he finally let me take back. That morning, I woke up to an empty house. No coffee brewing, no footsteps upstairs. Just me and the stillness. I made eggs for myself and sat by the window, watching the world move without him in it. No grief, no celebration, just breath. Later, I found a note on the kitchen table. "Lillian, I'm leaving the house to you. It's already signed over. Thank you for being better to me than I ever deserved. I hope someday you find peace in the place I took so much from. H." I folded it once and placed it in the drawer with the utility bills. Not because I planned to read it again, just because I didn't want to throw it away yet. By noon, I opened the windows wide. Let the air move through the rooms like new blood. I changed the sheets, put fresh flowers on the mantel, rearranged the books in the living room. It felt like claiming land I had lived on for decades, but never owned. Barbara stopped by that afternoon. She brought a jar of peach preserves and a smile that said she'd heard. "He's gone?" she asked, not unkindly. I nodded. She didn't say finally or good or what took you so long. She just set the jar on the counter and said, "Well then, I hope you're hungry." We sat in the kitchen and ate toast with preserves and talked about everything except him. Grandchildren, knee pain, the rising price of fabric. It felt like coming back to life. Later I took a walk, just a loop around the neighborhood. The trees were full and starting to let go of their edges. Burnt orange, soft brown, crisp gold. Everything was turning. Mrs. Green from 2 doors down waved from her porch. "You're glowing," she said. And maybe I was. Because I no longer had to make myself small to keep someone else from disappearing. I returned home to a house that finally sounded like me. No ticking clocks I didn't set. No drawers full of things I hadn't touched. No second guesses. Just light. Warm. Quiet. Mine. That evening, I sat down to write. Not to him. Not to anyone in particular. Just to myself. I wrote about the ache of being invisible in your own life. About the way women disappear quietly, year by year, under the weight of compromise. About how silence is not love, and service is not belonging, and forgiveness does not mean surrender. I wrote until my hand ached, and the room grew dark around me, and then I stopped. Not because the story was finished, but because I wasn't. I made a cup of tea. I lit a candle. And I sat with myself the way I used to sit with everyone else, with care, with presence, with softness. Harvey may have left the house, but I had left the marriage long before. The difference now was that I wasn't afraid anymore. I didn't need him to come back. I didn't need anyone to stay. I had come home to myself, and I wasn't going anywhere. If you've made it this far, maybe you've been there too. Folding someone else's clothes, measuring your words, shrinking inside a life that once felt safe. Maybe you've told yourself not now, not yet, maybe later. But you don't have to wait until you're broken to begin again. Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is simply stand up and say, "I am still here." If this story meant something to you, leave a comment, share it. And if you know someone who needs to read this, don't keep it quiet. We've been quiet long enough.